Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have with us today Nick Stefanidakis and Bar Livrant, and they are going to be talking to us about getting ready to go back to work. Now, just a few housekeeping items. Everyone is on mute to eliminate background noise. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the questions or chat sections. We are also recording this session and we will be sharing it with everyone that has registered later today or tomorrow. So with that, I will turn it over to Nick.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. Thanks for the introductions. And so I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction of our presentation today and set the stage, and then we'll hand it over to Bar Livrant, who's going to take us through the sequences today. Going back to a webinar that we had done last month around this topic of back to work and in general just planning for dealing with the current pandemic that we're all in the middle of. We talked about a journey that companies are going through, from how they first got everybody safely out of their offices and into managing working from home and keeping the business running while everybody was working remotely, making sure they had the access and the systems that they needed to stay effective and productive during the transition. Then we started moving into planning, which is where a lot of us are right now. We're starting to plan our return to work and how we're going to effectively get people back productive in our spaces. And then very soon, hopefully, we'll be actually moving folks back into the situation. And then what is really the new normal going to look like? What new changes, what new protocols are we going to have in place going forward? So we talked a little bit about that. And Bar, if you want to go to the next slide. During that session, we asked questions from the different perspectives of a typical organization. So if I'm responsible for health and safety, how do I ensure that our employees are going to be safe now and as they start to come back to the office? As a space planner, who am I going to bring back and when, on what schedule, and then where are we going to put those people when they do come back? And then how are we going to maintain and operate safely our facilities and keep the facilities running effectively in this new world, and keeping the supplies and the PPE and things that folks need to ensure that they're able to maintain and work within the facilities safely going forward. So I wanted to make sure we had the answers to all those kinds of questions that we know folks are starting to ask themselves in each other. And next slide. And as part of this, we did a fairly high-level tour of all the different ways that Archibus today, out of the box, can support these kinds of initiatives. Things from environmental health and safety, emergency preparedness, space management, reservations, maintenance, compliance management. All of these tie together to ensure that we are covering all of the bases to ensure we have a solid plan and a safe facility that we can reliably manage and make sure that as people come back to work, they're safe, they feel safe, they have access to the equipment and the services that they need to work within our new normal as we come back to work. Next slide. And as we did these webinars, we've been conducting surveys just to get a sense of what people felt in terms of, did they have a plan that covered a situation like what we've been going through? What are the biggest concerns, and how are they going to manage future plans? And as part of that, we're one of the things we did is last around what tactics people are going to follow when they do bring people back to the office. And what we're going to focus on today in Bar's presentation is really the items on the last survey, allowing remote work, protocols, more space between coworkers. So we're going to focus on some of the items on that last survey today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bar, who's going to take us through a deeper dive, a deeper look into how Archibus can be used to manage the safe return to work. On to you, Bar.
Thank you, Nick. Hi, everybody. So what we're going to do in the next about 35 minutes is go through several sequences that are each and one of those individual demos that I'm going to run are really coming together to kind of a whole picture of a readiness of your organization. And it's going to start from looking at what sequences we can run in AutoCAD perhaps that will show us our social distancing on our floor plan and how to transfer that into Archibus and start working on occupancy plan within Archibus. Then talk a little bit about hoteling and reservation. And from there, we're going to move and examine some strategies like shift work, move and scenarios. And finally, we'll go into assets and operations and look at different strategies in that area. So let's start with remote work analysis. So how do we look at our floor plan in a way that can really give us a good image of what social distancing plan gonna look like? Now, the nice thing about Archibus is its ability to connect with Autodesk utilities like AutoCAD that you see right here. The drawing that you see here is already connected to Archibus. We're already working with it. It's a floor plan existing in our system. And so there's a lot of data that is embedded in every one of those individual rooms and seats. You can see the room standards are connected. You can see that divisions and department and space types are already there because it's a working drawing that we're in fact dealing with on a regular basis. Now, from that, we can actually run a few Lisps that we developed in order to look at two things. One is how do we analyze every individual space and connect it after that to the existing data that Archibus provides. So for instance, can you do a 12-foot diameter circle at every occupiable geometry by room standards? And so this is what you see right here. It's a quick analysis based on that. The red circles are designed specific, so the Lisp itself is actually looking at the crossing between those circles. The ones that cross are in fact in red, the ones that are freestanding are designed to be green. Now, in the same way, from that, you can actually do many different things. Now, this 12-foot diameter that we specified here is a number that we just put in. Of course, it's a little bit over the guidelines. The guidelines are 6 feet. We just wanted to show that there are many ways to look at the space, and this is one of those that we in fact chose. So again, every variable here is one that you can input and then change it according to the scenario that you want to look at. Now, in the same way, a second Lisp that we've developed, instead of looking at center of geometries and parameters, it's going to change in a second, we are looking at existing AutoCAD features like blocks. And so those individual blocks can be targeted. In this case, the block called chair. And again, cross-reference with Archibus data like room standards. The block with the simple command with the Lisp with a simple command would generate a dot plan or a work point plan that will mark all those individual workstation or seats that are available and the proximity to one another. So the green ones will be the ones that are relatively clear and the red ones will be the ones that cross-reference with one another. Now, from here, we can actually start thinking creatively about where we want to go. Now, remember, it doesn't really matter how good the automated processing to create those circles is. In reality, a space planner and people that deal with this pandemic that we in fact have within your organization needs to look at it and think, is this the right thing to do? So even though we have those circles, there is still a personal touch or a person's touch to think about this in a way that actually connects with the guidelines. What we have done here is we took all those circles that cross one another and designed a possible occupancy plan where those individual circles in fact don't touch. and so create a social distancing plan that may in fact work. Now, in the same way, we can start thinking about areas, for instance, that circles in fact touch, but we know there's a wall between those two stations. So there's really no real danger of infection between those individual seats. In the same way, we can start thinking about circulation. So for instance, we placed a circulation line that can be a possible way for people to go in and out of the floor plan in relative safety. Now, the last thing we should look at, and this is something that you can do directly here, is the orientation of furniture. Is this the right way to have those furniture oriented for easy access and safe access, more importantly? So you can do, in fact, everything directly here in the CAD plan. And the nice thing, like I said before, is that you can actually publish all those individual layers directly into Archibus. And then continue working with the space management tool within Archibus to provide many different options of space planning. So the publishing itself will allow you, like I said, to bring all those CAD plans into Archibus. You can open the Space Console, which is our flagship space management tool, and then just add those specific layers that are coming directly into the Space Console into the drawing. And on top of those, develop all the strategies, the space management strategies that you're going to create. Now, the next sequence that we're going to go through is how to take those guidelines or those lines that we brought from AutoCAD and think creatively and then create an occupancy plan that will make sense. In the same way, we're going to look at how to take then that occupancy plan and turn it into a hoteling program, and how to refine your reservations that will reflect the new social distancing guidelines of meeting places and whatnot. And at the end, we're going to examine some move scenarios to see how to, after you have those individuals into places, or after you have the places designated, how to think about where those individuals are going to sit in relationship to one another, and different scenarios of how to make that a reality. So let's start with looking at the occupancy plan, or how turning all those analyses into occupancy. So again, the Space Console is really where we're going to do most of the work. The console itself not just allow you to view individual spaces and bring information from AutoCAD, but also allows you to do a lot of the allocation of space in one location. Now, what we have done is we thought that there are different space elements that were really going to help us create this individual space plan. So we have been working with space types specifically to space categories and type in order to designate areas that are unused, in this case a specific category that is COVID unused, and other areas that you'll see later on that are used in a very specific way, and then cross-reference those with employee standards and other type of information that will allow us then to create our scenarios. So those are the different types. And as we have those categories and type, we can assign them very quickly to rooms. So again, the Space Console is not just a viewing tool in this case, but also a management tool that will allow you to do both things. I'm going to highlight those by, in this case, the categories and types, and then assign very quickly those types to the floor plan. Now notice that the AutoCAD lines are visible and allowing me very quickly to find those areas that I find to be unsafe in this case. Now also notice that I am using some categories that are coming from the previous designation of space, for instance, workstations, and allowing them to and basically reusing information that I already have. I don't actually have to start from scratch at every point. So you can see here on the floor plan very clearly in the highlight legend that I have that some of those spaces, specifically the red one, are unused. The offices are designated differently, the workstation, because I'm starting to think creatively and saying, well, what type of employees do I have and where do I put them? And so maybe offices, because they have walls, might actually be used later to host my essential employees that might actually come to back to work on a regular basis versus others that might be allocated to a hoteling program and whatnot. Now, the Space Council is also a reporting tool. And so all the information and the metrics that I gathered by allocating individual spaces is being collected and being displayed immediately. So you can see how much space is allocated for areas that are unused versus how much space is allocated for use for COVID-specific spaces. We'll talk about it later, meetings and office place. You can also see very clearly the difference in capacity between the traditional floor plan that we had maybe before this pandemic and the capacity of this new floor plan that we just created. So you can see a reduction of almost 2/3 of the capacity on that floor plan to accommodate this social distancing strategy. Now, in order to make the individual rooms that I just allocated on the space occupiable, the system really allows me very quickly to create capacity or to introduce capacity to those types by the update employee capacity from room type like process. And I update the employee capacity from there, which kind of gives me a capacity of 1 for all those individual rooms by that type. And a very quick highlight by occupancy, what you can see is all those individual rooms that I can place individuals in. Now, the big question, of course, is who, not just where, but who. And this kind of goes to a strategy that you guys need to develop in a very robust way, to think about who from my workforce actually needs to come back on a regular basis into the office, who stays from home, who will use the new hoteling program that I'm going to create, who's going to use my maybe shift work program that I'm going to create. Once you have that, you can then translate it in a way to an Archibus language, and that's what we're doing here. We're actually taking different employees and designate or giving them standards, and later on we'll take those standards and assign them to spaces. So in this case, you can see 3 standards that we created. One is called essential, employees that come in every day. Others may be called hoteling, employees that will be hoteling into the space, and even others that will be work from home employees. These employees then for my workforce will then get those designations. So you can see a whole list of essential employees by division, by department. And then others will get maybe a hoteling designations, again, by division and department, and others the work from home. So this way you can start thinking about the workforce to make sure that the capacity, which is reduced, will fit the amount of employees that can come in, and you can still do work in the same way. Now, the allocation is pretty simple. You can correlate between those employee standards and the space standards that you have. In the occupancy part of the Space Council, all you have to do is find those employees. Now, notice here, I'm actually adding an employee standard so I can actually filter it by it. Notice that there is a floor called Work From Home 6. This is a fictional floor that I added to place all the employees that currently are working from home on it. And from it, I'm going to extract all the employees by department and division by employee standard and place them in the waiting room, which is a list that from it I'm going to drag and drop directly on the floor plan. On the floor plan itself, I can highlight by occupancy, I can border highlight by department and look at the actual legend, understand that the compliance department, which are the employees on the waiting list belong to, are in this light khaki green, and I place them in. Now I can add another complexity of room standards, for instance, which will tell me which are essential rooms and which are hotelable rooms. But in this case, I know that the offices are in fact the essential rooms. I'm not going to create a move order at this point. I'll do it in a different sequence. I'm just going to allocate them. Now, the hoteling and the reservation programs are similar, except that you do need to consider a few things before you start the program itself. The first thing you want to do is to understand which rooms are in fact hotelable. Now, under the reservation application, Archibus have the tools to do that. Once you actually create all the occupancy plan that we've seen before, you can actually find the building and the floor, locate those individual rooms that you would like make hotelable, and by the room type, in this case workstation, you can in bulk make them all hotelable, which is pretty simple. You also see here that rooms that are designated essential, like offices, or designated for essential employees, I should say, or rooms that are unused by the type unused workstation will not be hotelable. Now, there are also a lot of configuration types to the hoteling application that you might want to consider. Some of them has to do with time start and time end, afternoon start and afternoon end. Some of them have to do with check-in and check-out abilities, and those are important because if you do have spaces and they're valuable, you want to know if employees actually sit there and actually came that morning, even when they were in fact booked to do so. That will also affect your cleanup procedures later on. The department manager or the approving manager is not traditionally used because a lot of times you just book it and that's it. But in these times, you might want to consider having a manager looking at those bookings to make sure that the employee that comes in is in fact somebody that needs to be in the floor plan, on the floor, I should say, or not. And so one of the ways to do that is just to design or assign an approving manager for the hoteling process, like you just seen. Now, to book an individual hotel room, in this case, we're doing it directly from the Archibus workplace. I'm going to stop it here because it runs a little bit fast, but the idea is that once I click on the tile, I can actually see all the individual rooms that I designated as hotelable. And as they are, I can then filter to find the exact room by locating, rooms by department or division, rooms in the morning, rooms in the afternoon, and whatnot. And once I find the rooms that are most appropriate, all I have to do is click on it to book it. Just as simple as that. Now I can book for myself or for others, depends on my permission in the system. In this case, I'm just booking one for myself. Now, in the same way exactly, I can do all that on a mobile device. In this case, now notice that most of all the tiles that you see here, and then all the processes that are going to come after, are exactly the same to the one you just seen that are coming from our workplace desktop application, so to speak. And that's because what you see here is the same URL and the same workplace. It's just optimized to be viewed directly on a mobile device. And so it's exactly the same features. So again, you find your individual department if you want to, locate the room that is most appropriate, and just book it. Now, to configure reservations, which is going to come in a second, you are using quite a lot of the same processes. So the first thing, of course, is to find those individual rooms well, in this case, we're going to start with parameters. So just like we've done with the hoteling parameters, the reservation parameters really allow you to dig in. Do I have a configuration with Outlook, and how do I configure that? Is there a start time and an end time? Are there notifications that are coming in on a regular basis? And from that, you actually design those basic building blocks of your reservation program. Once you do that, you can actually go into your room reservoir and find those individual rooms that are most appropriate to be reservable. Now, remember, you might not use all the meeting rooms that you have. And so you can actually look at your stock and say, which rooms are in fact going to be the one I'm going to reserve and which one will not. So you can actually get the exact list. And just like we've done before in bulk, you can make them all reservable with one click of a button, so to speak. Now, the room arrangements, which is looking specifically at how the meeting room is going to be configured, is where you're going to define those basic, COVID-related, so to speak, building blocks. So how much time do I leave between meetings, right? What is the pre-block and the post-block? What is the capacity of that individual room now in this new normal that we live in? So in this case, we reduced the capacity to 2, and we allowed about 30 minutes before and after that we can actually direct services. Sorry about the transition here. But in the same way, we can then book a room by all these new parameters we just created. We can find those rooms. We can look at an image of those rooms. We can decide of a room with specific capacity, in this case 2, with amenities that we predefined for those individual rooms, search for them, and then book with one click of a button. Of course, you need to give it a time, give it a meeting, which it's going to do, look at the room itself, give it a meeting name, and even add an attendee to that meeting itself. Which you can see here. Now, the system is designed to send notification to all the individuals that are going to attend the meetings. And if you have integration with Outlook, also to send a notification and place the meeting on the Outlook calendar as well. There's also a very cool new 25/1 Archibus calendar that you want to check out. Didn't see it here, but it does exist, and it's really cool. All right, so moving to the next topic, which is actually looking at our floor plan strategically a little bit different than what we have seen before. But in a way, it takes a lot of the elements that we already seen. Shift work means that people will come, but they'll come staggered in one way or another. So it can be, a shift work can actually take many forms. It can be morning, could be evening, it can be day, staggering days, let's say Monday, Wednesday, Friday versus another shift on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Maybe you have a week in and a week out. The shift work can take many different forms. What we are going to look at here is one that deals specifically with a staggered week with some employees. Shift 1 is going to do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Fridays. Others going to do Tuesday and Thursdays. And of course, the essential employees are going to come in every day in the same way. So we start in AutoCAD, like you see over here. We look at the basic analysis, and we create those layers that then break the floor plan into the shift work. So some of those circles represent shift 1, others represent shift 2. And even though they crisscross, you can see, and this is kind of the beauty here, that the blue circles don't actually crisscross. They crisscross with the yellow circles, but those are not going to be on the floor at the same day. That's kind of the thinking behind that. And of course, this can be, just like we've done before, published into Archibus. Now, once in the Space Console, you can start thinking in the same lines that we have done before with space types. How do we represent shifts with space types and space categories? So we created a new space category called shift work. And from it, we created two space types, space one, shift one and shift two, again, following the same logic. And once we have done that, we allocated those spaces directly to the floor plan, as you can see. Now, the green spaces are still the offices designated as essential. And so it's relatively simple to say all the yellow, shift two, all the blue, shift one, and all the essential spaces as offices will be designated in green. And from that, of course, the occupancy plan. Now, notice the occupancy plan here will actually reflect a completely different density. And the density really shows that there are many rooms that are in fact one next to each other. However, in reality, the employees are not going to be on the floor the same days. And so it makes sense. Now, from this, we actually need to start thinking about our employee standard, just like you've done before, and say, okay, what is the employee standards now? Well, in this case, we have two groups of people. One belongs to shift one, and one belongs to shift two, and a third group of people that belongs to essential. And they all have sharing other parameters, for instance, like divisions and department. Now, once you define the employees that way, you can create those groups that you in fact are thinking of. And once the sequence will get to allocation, you can actually take the allocation and allocate those individuals directly by that. So as you allocate, all you have to do in this case is to filter, as we have done before, the employees by the fictional floor where those employees are on. In this case, a new floor, work from home 7. I'm looking for employees, human services of shift, specifically shift 1. And then I'm highlighting, I'm putting everybody, of course, on the waiting room so I can easily drag and drop on the floor plan. And I am highlighting my floor plan by department, first of all, and then by room types with a label of employees to make sure that I know that the rooms that already have employees are, I would not exceed capacity over there. This is just a legend, so it will be easier for me to understand exactly what I'm doing. So like I said, in this case, we're going to add employees to human services. So the colors really help me, and I can just drag and drop all those individuals to the blue areas, which are designated as shift 1. So once I have the employees there are many different options that I can in fact go and do. One of the options is to look at the seating arrangement to say, is this the best way of doing it? And as space planners are, like options. The space console allows you, in this case, and this is the sequence it's running right here, is to create a move scenario or a move project first and then a move scenario directly from the space console. So I'm in bulk, in fact, taking all the employees that belong to shift 2 and placing them on the waiting room and then creating a move order directly from the space console. As all projects, the move have, of course, its unique code and its description, but more importantly for our purposes is the start and end date of that individual move. Now, once the basic parameters for the project are completed, all I have to do is click OK to create the actual move project. Once created, I can go to my move console, find it as a requested move, and then start thinking about it creatively and saying, how many scenarios I can make to show everybody what's going to be the next seating arrangement on this individual floor with social distancing guidelines in mind. So I can open that individual floor, see all those individuals that are assigned to this move, highlight my floor plan exactly the same way as I've done in the space console, and then by division, by department, assigning those individuals into spaces, as you can see over here. Now, the nice thing about this, of course, is that once I'm done with one scenario, I can then create a second scenario and do exactly the same thing, right? So I'm going to the second scenario here. I'm just creating one from scratch. Now note, just remember that those are going, all the data that I'm creating is going to fall on scenario as scenario data, and not going to affect the actual floor plan and the actual location that I have right now. To the new scenario, I can add a floor plan. In this case, I'm adding exactly the same floor plan as scenario one. Because all I'm interested in is in a different seating arrangement. But, and this is important, or at least interesting, I don't actually have to do that. I can actually go and create in AutoCAD a completely different new layout, let's say a COVID layout that I designed specifically for my floor plan, because I was way more stringent of changing the layout by brand new guidelines. And then I can take this new floor plan that I just created and assign it to this scenario and do all the seating changes or individual placings, so to speak, or allocation by that new layout. It doesn't exist yet in reality, but will exist when I'm done with construction. And so that is a possibility that I, in fact, can do with the Archibus move scenario. Now, once I have both allocations done, on both seat assignments done, I can then compare both of those scenarios to export those data, compare the scenarios by many different variabilities or metrics, so to speak, and then decide which one is the most appropriate for the move that I'm going to create. And once I have it, I can then take that scenario, make it the move order, and then approve it and have the move run through its process and allocate all the employees, give the approval and all the notification to all the employees as the move process continues. All right. So moving on to assets and building operation or maintenance. There is quite a lot of guidelines that revolve around asset management and preventive or corrective maintenance management on a floor plan, specifically as a response to COVID, as preparation, prophylactic, so to speak, or as a response to, let's say, a case that is being discovered and whatnot. Some of it has to do with spaces that are designated specifically, like isolation areas, like triage areas, lobbies that are designed in a different way, perhaps. Some of it has to do with allocating assets on floor plans that will help maintain high level of sanitation, let's say Purell stations or whatnot, all over the floor plan in different key strategic locations. Some of it has to do with an easy access to a maintenance request in response to something that people have seen. Maybe a person that was identified with symptoms and now is in isolation or was sent home because of that, but the area still needs to be disinfected and whatnot. So we're going to go for a sequence that covers some of those to help us understand how Archibus can actually help with many of these scenarios. So the first sequence we're going to talk about is how do I very quickly register many different assets, in this case sanitation station. Let me start this. And and assign them to locations on my floor plan. The Archibus Asset Management registration console really allows you, whether from a desktop at your convenience or even from a mobile app, to register many assets all at once. In this case, I'm registering about 10 of them and giving them a specific standard that I predefine. In this case, a sanitation unit or hand sanitation unit. I'm giving it a specific code and placing them in a specific location, but not down to the room, even though I could, because I prefer to do that in a more robust way through the life cycle console. The life cycle console, again, is one of the flagship consoles of the asset management tools that really allows me to dig deep and understand all the ins and outs of all the assets that I have in my facilities. I can look at individual, in this case, of the new sanitation station that I just created, and add information like criticality. So the priority will be to those critical assets, in this case, the sanitation station. I can also give equipment condition status. For instance, every time I have a service request to those individual assets, the individuals that are doing the request can also change the status as they see fit, or condition assessment can do that as well. Now, of course, the manufacturer of that individual station and the model number. At this tab, at the location affiliation tab, I then assign that individual asset a room code. So it will fall on the exact location in the floor plan that I would like to station it later on. This will also help me with locating it on a floor plan directly on the mobile app, and we'll see that in a few seconds. Now the usage tab, very quickly, just going to give life expectancy, and the cost tab, of course, going to give me a lot of information about cost, which then will take me to many different parameters about depreciation and financial status of that individual asset. Once I have it, I can go to my mobile device, click on locate person or room or an asset, and then locate those individual sanitation station directly on a floor plan, which is what I would like to do sometimes when there's a place when I do need those, when I need those. So a very quick search will give me a list of all those individual stations that I have. Clicking on them will give me the exact location of those stations on a floor plan. Now, designing a service level agreement specifically for a COVID problem type is really a matter of a few minutes of thinking. Now, the service level agreement, then you can see here the process of what is that, what entails, or what exactly happens when this automated process activated, is actually the mechanism, or the SLA is the mechanism behind the automated process of a service request. That means it tells the processor what exactly to do at every individual step. So when it's requested, it's doing one thing. When it's approved, it's doing another thing. Now, notice in this specific case that it has very little approvals, because we're talking about cleanup that has to do with pathogens that are dangerous. And so we're trying to speed up the service to as much as we in fact can, and we're directing all services to a work team that was created here that is called the COVID Clean Team, of individuals that presumably were actually trained specifically of how to deal with sanitation of that level. We also created a very wide window of operation, 9 to 9, 24 hours, which is quite wide, maybe wider than we needed, but still did, and a very short response time for that individual service level. Now, the other thing that we have done is, I'm ahead of the sequence. Another thing that we have done is, of course, connected all of that to a problem type called COVID sanitation. Now, the reason I'm going backwards and just showing you the problem type, which I'm going to do right now, is is because the way to actually have this individual problem type appear in my workplace, that means the handheld device and a tile on the handheld device or the services that are coming from the workplace, is by designated it as active for self-service, which we just have done. And then I can actually go to my mobile device, find the tile, in this case, the COVID cleaning tile that we created, and then report or request a service if need be. In this case, we have found that an employee exhibited perhaps the symptoms of COVID, and so after that person went home, we still need to clean the desk and the area. I can actually locate the exact location where the employee have sat. Presumably that person is not doing the same service request, so I'm doing it for him. So I sit in 441, he sits in 126. I can take a picture of the desk, or my desk in this case, and then click use the image and click send in order for the process to complete. Just as simple as that. And what it really does in the back end is take this SLA that I just created and runs with it to send this information to the individual that needs to do the work. Now, in the same way, we want to, and again, I'm going back to hoteling and reservations now, and I'm saying, okay, I know the rooms that are going to be reservable. I know the rooms are going to be hotelable, but can I in fact create processes that will automatically send service requests to the right individuals to come in and do work before and after every meeting that is taking place for, higher level of sanitation, and also after every booking of the hoteling desks that are being designated or being booked, I should say, every day. And the answer to those two questions, of course. And this is the sequence that we're going to cover right now. The first thing we'll do is we're going to understand that, or basically open up, I should say, the ability of this specific trade, in this case, a janitorial, code trade, somebody within my organization, to work to actually receive service requests when they are assigned to an individual, when I should say an actual room is being reserved. And so the reservation generate work request little tab here, if I just change it from no to one, will actually allow the janitorial trade to be called upon when a room is in fact reserved. In the same way, if I'm working with contractors outside my building, I can do that through vendors. So by clicking on reservation generate work request to yes on a vendor's profile, I in fact call upon that vendor or have a service request being generated for that vendor when a specific arrangement of a room is in fact being requested. And this is what's going to happen right here, right? So what I'm doing is I'm actually connected those trades or vendors to a specific room arrangement. And by giving the room a specific arrangement, I'm tying all those little dots together for a service request to be created. Now, when I'm looking at the actual reservation report, what I'm seeing, let me just stop this here, because this sequence is a little quick, that every cleanup and every setup that is being created is actually connected to a pre-designed problem type of reservation setup and reservation cleanup, which means there's already an SLA in the background that governs those service requests that are coming out, that will then ship them or send them to the right trade or the right vendor as I designated. Now, in the same way, I can then configure hoteling, except that in order to give a hoteling or a booking an actual or connect a request or service request to a booking, what I really need to do is to, let me stop it right here, is to connect a resource to that individual booking. So what we have done here is created a specific resource standard that is called cleanup, and assigned to that resource a trade and a vendor basically the same trade and vendors that will deal with all the cleanups that we have in my organization. And then from it, we then created a very quick, we assigned that resource to site, and that's kind of where I was going with that. That means that that individual resource is then assigned to individual area, in this case, a site in a building. And every time that a booking will happen in that specific building, then there will be an option to use cleanup as a resource. And when it's actually be used, a service request, in fact, is being created. So very quickly, we're going to go through a booking process that will then assign that resource to individual booking. I'm doing that as an admin and not from an actual mobile device, but the exact process can happen on your mobile device as we've seen already before. So when I create a booking of a room, I can also add the resources to it, and then the room cleanup is a resource that is attached specifically to that booking, and then a service request is being created to assign services to that individual room for every booking. All right, the last sequence we're going to go through is a very quick PM that is created specifically for a location. Now we have done, now PM is a bread and butter Archibus process, but we usually don't do it for locations, but Archibus absolutely can do that. And the reason we want to do this is to enhance the sanitation at areas that are COVID designated. That means areas that we know are more exposed perhaps to the COVID than others. So the process that you see here being created is directed for those spaces specifically. So I created the process with several steps. Every one of those will have a work request assigned to them, and then assign this specific process to location versus equipment. Gave it a specific trade and a cost category, in this case for a contract. Once the procedure was designed, I can assign it now to space, specifically to a location, so building, a floor, and by standard, or in this case by room category specifically and type, only to spaces that are COVID designated. So remember we talked about in the beginning, it was like which areas are those? So maybe are the triage areas or the isolation spaces, or maybe spaces that are restricted, or maybe common areas that are frequently used, and then have this specific PM targets them daily with enhanced cleaning in mind. Now, once I assign it, I can immediately schedule it. Now, because I want it to be done daily, I would like to then create some kind of a frequency that will reflect that. I'm going to turn it into critical to make sure that those individuals, so this specific PM will have priority, time to complete, and the day that it starts, and then create a recurrence pattern of, of daily, every day. And as simple as that, that's a very, of course, simple scheduling pattern. And once they're all connected, I can generate a work order directly from the system immediately. All I have to do is to give the system a site and a floor, a range of dates. In this case, I'm only generating a handful of PMs for only one day. Once I click next, it's going to run a process to generate those. These are just the actual bookings, the work orders that are generated directly. And you can see that every room is being generated a separate work order to be completed. All right, so with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Danielle to take us home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bar. Thank you for showing us those great examples. It was really, really informative. So just a few other items we wanted to share with you before we close out. We do have some additional resources available. Right now, we are offering our health and safety application for free, new licenses until the end of September of 2021. So we just want to make sure that our customers have the resources available to see their workplace through the COVID-19 crisis. And it is available to all existing customers with an active software subscription contract. It can be used on any version of Archibus Web Central where the health and safety application is available. And it is subject to the same support as other Web Central applications. And I'm going to just paste that link in the chat in case you don't want to type it all out. And then if we go to the next slide, I also just want to share our Getting Back to Work Resource Center. So again, I'll copy and paste this link into the chat, but this is a great resource. We have a ton of interviews and blogs. We also have the recording for the previous back to work, or sorry, COVID-19 webinar, and we will also be posting the recording of this webinar there. So that's a great resource to check out as well. And then finally, we have additional webinars that are coming up. Our sister company, CeraView, is going to be hosting a webinar on June 2nd and 3rd, really. And I'm going to add those in here as well into the chat. So we're actually hosting 2 different sessions, depending on where you are in the world. We'll host one on June 2nd at 1 p.m. Eastern, which is 10 a.m. Pacific, and then also one on June 3rd at 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Time, and 8 a.m. Japan Standard Time. And that webinar is going to be focusing on can't miss tips on executing a safe and effective office move back strategy. So be sure to register for that. And we are also going to be providing additional industry specific webinars coming soon. So we will keep you posted on those, but keep an eye out. I know we have just a minute left here. Nick was going through and answering most of the questions, so I think he did a great job of hopefully getting to almost everyone here. Let's just see if there are any additional questions.
The theme of the questions in general was around the version that Bar demonstrated today and the capabilities of whether or not they're available in previous versions. And everything that Bar showed is available in previous versions. It might look different, or the console might be different, but more or less the functionality that was shown today is available in prior versions. So that's one thing. These are our standard applications. The other questions that we got were around the availability of the Autocad routines that Bar demonstrated. And we will make those available. We'll have a link or some reference to those in our follow-up communication that will include the link to the recording of this session. So we'll make those available as well.